Hello, this is JT, the host of The Stew with JT Brew. You're listening to Dynasty Hot Seat.
Yes, hello everybody, and welcome back once again to the Dynasty Hot Seat. It's the only Dynasty show that is a certified inferno, and today is an exciting day, ladies and gentlemen, because we're back once again with our, hey, it's way too early, but we don't really care. It's a 2025 rookie mock draft. I got JT on the show. JT, my goodness, you could not be busier. You're doing loads of stuff over at Fantasy and Frames, like you mentioned, Stu, with JT Brew. You're doing some IDP stuff. You're doing some Dynasty evaluation stuff. You do stuff for DLF. You might be the busiest guy in all of fantasy football, JT. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. How you doing, my friend?
I'm pumped to be on the show. Thanks very much. I do a little bit of everything, but the one thing I really love is the draft. The draft is like my favorite time of the whole year. I love the whole evaluation process leading up to the draft, doing the mock drafts, actually watching the draft, and then basically writing articles and kind of breaking down where we think these guys are going to go once we figure out their landing spots. So it's been a little while since I've talked some draft and college football C2C Devy stuff. So I'm pumped to be doing this today. Nice little break from the regular season grind.
Absolutely. It's getting that itch out the way already, right? Isn't it? And if you're new here and you're trying to scratch that rookie itch as well, thank you so much for joining. Always appreciate a like and a subscribe so you won't miss out on these rookie mock drafts. And JT, no time like the present. We're going to go through the first round of rookies here. You're going to say who you think will be chosen or who is your personal pick in each position, and we'll have a little chat about why. So let's start right at the top with 101. Who's your first round pick in a Superflex rookie mock draft from this 2025 class? Let's go.
So obviously there's going to be some differences, whether somebody at your top of your draft needs a QB, needs a running back, needs a wide receiver, might adjust things. But for me, if you're just going, pure talent alone without knowing a landing spot, I think it's Tet MacMillan, wide receiver, Arizona. We've seen Arizona struggled a bit this year as a team, but he's had some monster games. And part of the deal is people have been all over him. No Jacob Cowing this year. He's on the 49ers. So all the attention's been on Tet MacMillan, and it's been a little bit of a struggle for them as a team, but I think he's proven he has a 300-yard game and a 200-yard receiving game this year. If anybody listened to me on the Stew with JT Brew prior to the season, I said the best bet you could make this season was taking Tet MacMillan over 1,000 receiving yards. I thought it was the easiest bet to hit. He's literally 18 yards away with 4 games to play. So he should hit that unless something catastrophic happens. I just think Tet MacMillan, I've seen people comparing him to a lot of different guys. He kind of reminds me of Mike Evans. He's just a big, tall receiver. He can go deep down the field, catch the ball deep, but he also can break off, run short routes. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but he's got great body size. He's got good speed for his size. I just think that there's going to be some teams. We've seen the rise of the smaller, faster wide receiver in the NFL, but teams love that when these guys have big size, big bodies, big frames, and he's that type of player. I think he's going to be absolutely a guy that shoots up the draft boards, especially after you see him in Indianapolis for the combine. I think he's going to show out there, play really well. I don't think he is athletic of a freak as Brian Thomas was last year out of LSU, but I think people are going to see that big body and that ability to go up and get the ball, and they're going to fall in love with him.
It's that I'm calling him a pterodactyl all year. It's that wingspan, right, that he has. Is absolutely crazy. I don't know if you've seen that highlight package of he caught this like high catch. This is just in practice, but he might do this at the combine where he like caught the high pass and brought it in under his legs like a basketball player going up for the rim. Did you see that? It was like unbelievable.
Yeah, the guy's got great athletic ability. Yeah, he's got great athletic ability, great control. He was one of my favorite guys going into last season. I was like, man, I just feel like this guy has got a lot of talent. And then when they made the switch at QB and went with his high school quarterback, Noah Fafita. When he went to Fafita, I was like, oh no, they're gonna unlock him now, because now he's got his best friend, his high school quarterback in the game, and it was like immediately they had that connection. He started going to him. So I just think that he's a guy that the more NFL fantasy players see him, they're gonna freak out and be like, oh, I want that guy on my team.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm not being put off by any kind of, struggles that he's had this season in certain games, because you're right, he's being double team, triple team. They know that's the biggest that Arizona have. So yeah, I'm not put off by any kind of performance issues from Tet MacMillan. He's my 1-on-1 as well. So we're in absolute agreement there, JT. So let's move on to 102 and see if we're still in the same agreement. So you've got at 102.
Yeah, so this one, it's going to really depend on landing spot, but I think just because there's going to be a ton of talent in this league, my 102 and 103, I will tell you, I switched right before the show. Ashton Jeanty right now, the running back for Boise State, I think is an absolute beast. It's so hard to pass up these guys. If he ends up being a first round NFL pick, it's going to be close, but if he goes anywhere in the first round or top of the second round, I think he's going to have to be a top 3 guy in fantasy rookie drafts. I just think he's going to be. Everyone needs running back, and we can see that teams are shifting to running back this year, and there's quite a few teams that really are desperate. If he ends up in a really nice landing spot this next year, I just think it's going to be very hard to see him drop out of the top 3 in most drafts. Guys, low to the ground. I mean, if you see his thighs are ridiculous. They're huge. Yeah. I mean, he's got great contact balance, that he breaks tackles left and right in games. It's insane how he breaks tackles. The guy can catch the ball in the backfield. They know everybody's kind of comparing his season to Barry Sanders from Oklahoma State when he won the Heisman, set the record for most yards. He kind of reminds me a lot of, and it's not Barry Sanders. He reminds me a lot of LaDainian Tomlinson when he was at TCU. When it was that year, TCU, everybody knew he was going to get the ball every play. And it just didn't matter. Yeah. People still couldn't stop him. He still was all over the place. He really, this year, watching film on him really reminds me of LaDainian Tomlinson. And I think he's going to be one of those guys that he's going to improve his pass catching as he gets to the higher level. And he has a team that is trying to get him the ball more. We haven't seen a ton of it just because Boise State doesn't do it a lot, but I think he has that ability. Special season, had his worst game of the year, and it was 133 yards on touchdown. So a guy's having a hell of a year when the betting odds are almost every week you have to bet 2 or 3 touchdowns and almost 200 yards rushing to even get reasonable odds. He's been phenomenal, and I think his name, even though it's pretty big in circles right now, I think it's going to go up because I think this Boise State team has a chance to make the playoffs. And if they make the playoffs, I think they could upset some big-time schools. I think that's going to get even more eyes on GT, and people are going to be super excited to take him in their fantasy drafts.
Yeah, what I really like about him as well is obviously Boise State they don't have like the trickiest schedule in the world, but whenever they did come up against a team like Oregon this year, he still put up like 200 yards and 3 touchdowns against Oregon. So this isn't someone that's bullying lesser opposition. He's doing it against the toughest team out there in Oregon, and no matter what team he comes up against, he is still dominating, still crushing. JT, I gotta ask, I've seen it so many times, I've seen it mocked so many times. If he goes to the Dallas Cowboys in round 1, what's going to happen to that stock?
I think he goes all the way. I mean, there's going to be a ton of people that take him 1-1. I mean, if he goes to the Cowboys in round 1, you're just like, there's a million Cowboy fans out there. And the fact that they have a good offense, and that's really what they've been needing. People are going to see Zeke Elliott 2.0. They're going to be like, oh, I got to get him. Because I'm obviously Zeke is not the guy he used to be, but man, Zeke was awesome there for his first 5 or 6 years in the league. I think people are going to see that, and they're going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm all over it. So if he goes anywhere in the late first round or gets a nice landing spot like Dallas, a team that he's going to plug and play right in, and they're on a good offense, I think he goes – it's going to completely come down to your draft and what someone needs, and whether he's going 101, 102, or 103. And I think those really are going to depend on team needy. Do I need a running back? Do I need a wide receiver? Do I need a quarterback in my Superflex draft?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. So you kind of teased earlier, JT, you were in between 102, 103. So who was the other player then at 103 that you were debating switching up to 102?
So this was my preseason 101, but he's dropped a little bit. It's hard for me to say that. As you can see in my background, I'm a Mizzou guy. Went to Mizzou. Luther Burden III having a little bit of a down year for him just because the offense hasn't been clicking for Missouri. It's been a little bit of a struggle. I think there's going to be some people that are going to be down on him just because the stats aren't there this year. But I'm also one of those guys. I love stats. Believe me, I'm a fantasy football person, so I'm all about stats. But there's times where the stats aren't telling you the whole story. And that's with him. It's not telling the whole story this year. He showed last year he can do it all. He can go deep. He's a yak king. You just get the ball in his hands. He can make plays. Brady Cook, the quarterback from Missouri, he just hasn't had the same season. He struggled a bit, and the offense just hasn't connected like it did last year. So you've seen those numbers fall a bit. The talent is still there for me. And honestly, I have to say, with the right landing spot, he could jump back to 101 for me. I just think he's that type of guy in this type of NFL, the way they work now in getting guys the ball in space, letting them create yards after catch. He's that type of player. He's a guy that can make moves. He punt returns. You can hand the ball off to him. He's got nice size, so it's not like he's a small guy. He's right in that 5'10" to 6 foot, 200-pound range, and with just really great speed. I think he's going to fall in some people's minds just because of the little bit of a down season, but I don't think NFL people, he's going to go down in their book. I think they've seen what he can do. He was, number one wide receiver in the country coming out of high school. He hasn't disappointed there, and he's not in a super pass happy offense. So you're not seeing him on one of these teams like, Oregon has been in the past where they're throwing the ball every play and these wideouts are putting up insane numbers because of it. Missouri's a run first team. They have been the entire time Eli Drinkwaltz has been there. So I don't think it hurts him. The biggest thing I think for him is if you've been looking at some mocks, depending on landing spot, is where I could see him getting killed. I've seen a couple spots where he goes to the Titans. I think that crushes him. I think he falls in drafts if he goes there because people don't like that landing spot. I hate it. I don't want anybody tied to Will Levis or whoever else ends up being the QB there right now. That's my only worry about him. But if he gets in a really nice spot, even if he falls later in the draft, say he goes in the 20s as opposed to a top 10 guy, which I think he's a top 10 guy. But say he falls in the 20s, if he falls in the 20s and ends up being in a nice spot where he goes to the Chargers or someone like that, I'm like, dude, lights out. I'm all in again. I mean, he would be, if you put him on the Chargers with like a Lad McConkey, I'm sold. With Justin Herbert at QB, I'm sold. I'm drafting him, possibly 101. So he's a guy I love. I think you're going to hear people back and forth on him because of the season totals, but he sold me. He answered all the questions last year for me. The question was, can he go deep? Can he do more than just catch short passes and bust it? Yes, he showed that all last year. So I'm still in on Luther Burden. If I had the 103 and he got to me at 103, I'd be stoked.
I can't stop thinking about that Chargers landing spot now. I think, you're right.
It would be so pretty.
Physical, strong guy.
So
and it feels like it would suit what Harbaugh's trying to build there, right? Burden's big kind of bruiser, like big physical guy. That works, right?
Mm-hmm. And he's a guy that, he's a yak guy. Everybody likes to always compare any yak guy to Deebo Samuel, and he's not as stout like Deebo, but he's a guy that plays a similar type of game in that he catches the ball, he makes guys miss. You can throw it to him on bubble screens. He's going to get you huge plays. He can go deep. He's not, he's not the absolute fastest burner that just absolutely takes the top off, but he can do it just like Deebo can. So I just think I think when people see it and you get him in the combine and he does it and you see the overall talent and ability, I think people are going to be like, oh yeah, this guy's legit.
Yeah. By the way, JT, while we're talking about Mizzou, can we get goddamn Cody Schrader on the field somewhere, please, and give him a chance? That guy was awesome last year, right?
He's a guy that I still think is worth a stash if you're in a deep dynasty league on a taxi squad, because I think there's a chance he makes it on a team next year. He's one of those guys that he just needs to end up in the right situation where he gets a chance to play, and I think he can produce. I really do. I just think he's a tough-nosed guy. He's never going to be that guy that just absolutely busts out and, it is running 80-yard touchdowns, but man, the guy just knows how to play running back. I still think The Niners was a tough spot when he originally went there because it's like they were so loaded at running back. Was like, man, he's got to be the fourth or fifth guy. Keep your eye on him, though. I still think there's a chance that he ends up somewhere in the next year or two, and if he gets any kind of opportunity, I think he could prove himself.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. He's one of my guys from last year, so hopefully he gets a shot. And moving on now to pick 1-4. Is this where it becomes a bit trickier for you? Those top three guys seem pretty locked in. Is this where it becomes a bit more fluid for you, or are you still fairly locked in with your fourth?
Yeah, so this one, I think, outside of these top three guys, I think the question is really what you're going to end up having is in your drafts is who needs what, where. I think is where you're going to start seeing some of these guys. You're good. It's just like in fantasy, is just like the NFL. You're going to get teams that need QB. And they're going to go QB because they got to go QB because they just have to get a QB. Now, if you get in teams where they're not like maybe they had some injuries and they've got like a solid base with good QBs, but they just had injuries and ended up getting a top pick or made a trade somewhere and ended up getting a higher pick. This is where I think you can see some movement because, again, if you don't have to go QB here, I could see a team going wide out or running back. I really like this running back class, so it's going to be interesting to see where these guys' landing spots are. But this is a controversial pick, but I've got to stick with it because I've stuck with this basically since before last season. I think Shedeur Sanders from Colorado is the number one quarterback in this draft. Now, I got an insane amount of hate when I said this prior to not even this season, the season before when he transferred into Colorado, and people are like, "What are you talking about?" Again, watch the film. A lot of people, what they want to do is they just want to hate on him because of his name and who his dad is. And then people are like, oh, people are only talking about him because he's Deion's kid. Dude, the guy, he was a high-level recruit out of high school. We've seen it, man. Just because your dad was a good player or a high-level guy, the teams aren't just going to give you, outside of maybe Bronny James, in the NFL, teams aren't just going to draft you and give you spots because of your name. I mean, we saw it last year. A ton of former NFL players, their sons got drafted, but they got drafted late. Jerry Rice's son got drafted, and he was a practice squad guy. I mean, the teams aren't just gonna take you because you're who your dad is. I mean, that's ridiculous. And people saying that are just hating. They're hating just to hate. I think Shedeur's the top guy, and I'll tell you why. I loved him coming in. The guy throws a pretty deep ball. Very catchable, super catchable deep ball. People's like, oh, it's the system they're running for. He's shown he can throw short, he can throw intermediate, he can throw deep. He's very patient in the pocket. I actually think he's almost been too patient at times in the pocket, and that's where you've seen him with the sack numbers. And so that's the other thing, guys. The big misnomer is that he's like not athletic at all and he's super slow. People are like, oh, he's like the slow. I've seen memes, people like making fun of these dudes like barely running in quicksand. They're like, oh, that Shedeur Sanders. I'm like, have you watched him play? Oh, he's not that. He's taken a ton of sacks because of bad O-line play, and also because he's just trying to hold the ball and make too many plays, and he needs to get rid of it, which he's done much better job of this season. But the guy can move. Now, he's not Michael Vick. He's not Jaden Daniels, but he's not just a guy that's just stuck there. He has, I think, 12 or 13 career rushing touchdowns. So it's not, and they're not one yard sneaks. So the guy can move. He's not running a 4.4. But he's agile. He's mobile. I kind of, and I don't think he's like this type of player, but watching him run, he kind of reminds me a little more of like an Andrew Luck type guy. That's like, he's not a runner, but he can move if he needs to, and he can get you some yards. He's not going to, break off a 40-yarder, but he can get out of the pocket and get you a 7, 8, 9 when you need it for a first down. So, I think people have greatly over-exaggerated his lack of athleticism. And I just think you're going to see, and I've said this since before last year, I really think the Raiders want him bad. I think he's going to go to the Raiders. If they don't end up in a spot where they can get him, I think they move up to get him because I really do think they want him. I think they wanted Michael Penix last year, and when Penix went, I immediately was like, oh, they're going to be on Shedeur next year. Like this, and he just feels like a good fit there for that team. They need to reset. There's a couple different guys they could go to. And I just, I've seen people where like they were trashier forever. He was not a first round quarterback. Then I see people, all of a sudden he's the 101 in the NFL draft. So I don't know if he goes 101. I think he can. I just think, who does somebody want him enough to move on to 101? I think I could see that happening. I definitely think the Raiders are a team to keep an eye on. I think they want to go QB, and I think he will be their number one guy on their board.
What would you say his most like special attribute is? Because whenever I'm watching Shedeur Sanders, I'm thinking he ticks so many boxes, but I struggle to kind of go, this is the thing that sets him apart. I suppose it might be his accuracy, which I really like, but what would you say is like his most elite attribute?
Yeah, I think his accuracy is really great. I mean, he puts the balls in some just great spots for his wide receivers. Now he's helped that he's had a good thing. And I will say, I did just go watch him in person this weekend. I was in Colorado. Ooh. I went to the game to watch him and Travis Hunter. My niece goes to school there. It was her birthday. Flew out there, took my son. We went to the game. Absolute dynamic atmosphere. Such a cool stadium. Looking at the mountains. I mean, if you ever get a chance to go there, do it. Even if you don't like Colorado, it's super cool. Super cool. So I just see him in person. I love Travis Hunter with him. I just think he has taken so much heat. I think he's built to be an NFL quarterback. I think he's ready to take that heat. I think he's ready. I think mentally, I mean, people have ripped it like, oh, teams are going to hate him. He's acted like this. He's called players out. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think if other quarterbacks had done some of the things he done, I don't think people would be shouting quite as loud. I think it's more of a personal hate for Deion and for him. Because I think people were mad that they got so much attention out of nowhere and people thought it wasn't deserved. I think, especially because the record was bad last year. But hey, he took probably the worst team in Division I college football, a 1-11 horrible Colorado team, won 4 games and was in almost every game but 1 or 2. I mean, Oregon blew them out, but almost every other game they were like 1-score games in a very tough Pac-12. So, and you're seeing that this year. They could have lost a couple more games. There's been a lot of close games, but they've also could have won all their games. I mean, Nebraska really put it to them defensively. That game got off to a bad start, but they legitimately could have beaten everyone on their schedule. So I like Sanders. I think the accuracy is really good. And I think as he gets better, and here's the other thing. There's a few quarterbacks I love in this draft, and I know I'm going real long on him, so I apologize. But there's other quarterbacks in this draft that I think are going to really struggle with pressure. I think he's already struggled with pressure, and he's starting to figure it out because he has gotten so much heat in college. I think some of these guys are going to go to the NFL. If they end up on a team with a bad line, they're going to really struggle. Now, not to say he won't take some struggle, have some struggles too with a bad line. Every quarterback does, but I think he'll handle it better because he's used to it. He's done it. He's been through it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there. I think he's very deserving of the 104 spot. And at 1-5, are we sticking around the same location, Jeanty?
Yeah, for me, and this is going to be a big one up for debate on what they do, is Travis Hunter. Everybody's like, what do you do with Travis Hunter? I think he's the Heisman winner, personally. I think he's the best player in the country. I love what Jeanty's done. But what Travis Hunter has done has just been incredible. I just saw him last week, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, the guy makes plays. I think he's just going to get better if he stays at wide receiver. Now, how much can he play both ways in the NFL? That's the question. Is he a wideout or is he a cornerback? Do they have him be a strict cornerback? Obviously, that changes everything. If he goes to a team that pretty much says, hey, we're going to play him on defense, but we're going to work him in packages on offense, now he drops in your draft. I mean, he obviously drops. If you play in any IDP leagues, which I play in every type of league, he's an IDP freak. If he ends up playing cornerback and playing any decent amount of offense, he's a guy you're going to absolutely want, like right at the top of your draft, because he's going to score you offensive points on defense and a defensive slot. He's going to be, I mean, man, boom, mind blown. It's going to be crazy. So it really depends on the league you're in and where he goes. He needs a little polish at wide receiver. I think some of these other guys are better route runners than him. But you also got to go, this is a guy that's played both ways. He doesn't spend all practice working on routes, doing these things. But I think he has elite athleticism. And so for me, I'm buying the athleticism. I think he can improve. I think he can find a coaching staff that can work on those little things and make him better. But I'm buying the talent in Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
If there's any way he's going to play a lot of offense or a majority of offense in the NFL, I want a piece of that.
I think just the way the league's going as well, I just have a feeling that that's what he will do. I think he will be drafted as a wide receiver, as like big time weapon. And then maybe if things don't work out, people will move him to cornerback. But I think it'll be wide receiver first.
I think here's what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to play him at wideout, and I think he's going to play some possible slot corner and some things on defense, but I don't think he's going to necessarily be a full-time defensive guy. I think he's one of those guys that maybe he'll come in on like third downs, third and longs, plays like that, maybe play 2-3 plays on defense, or like they might give him a series on defense, take him out, give him a series, and let him play a little more offense. I just think there's going to be too many coaches that really love him offensively that I think that he's going to have to play some offense.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. What a special thought. You're right. If he wins the Heisman, you can't have any complaints because who else is doing what he's doing in college football right now at that level on both sides of the ball? So yeah, if you could pick him up at 105, that's a great steal for sure. And moving on to 106. Where are you going now, JT?
So this one, I've been back and forth on my top 3 QBs all year and where these guys go. And I think where they land makes a big difference. Yeah. Cam Ward has jumped up. He was my QB3 entering the season. So I will go back. I had Shedeur Sanders 1, I had Carson Beck, Georgia 2, and I had Cam Ward as my number 3 QB coming this year. So that was my preseason rankings. Cam Ward's moved up. I like Cam Ward a ton.
Yeah.
Now there's going to be some people who don't like Cam Ward because there's some issues there. He has been terrible under pressure. Like when teams blitz him and come, he's not been good. Now, where he has been fantastic is the Patrick Mahomes role where I get out of the pocket, I move around, I extend plays, and then I make a huge play downfield. He's elite at that. He is elite at doing that, making plays, extending plays, getting the ball downfield. Now, the question is, where does he land and what kind of coaching staff is he going to be with? Because if he gets on a team where they're like, you have to structure 3-step, boom, throw, I don't know if he's going to be very good. And so it really is going to be interesting where he lands. Because if he can be in the right coaching staff where they can use his athleticism, let him roll out of the pocket, let him make plays, that's where he excels. You're going to have the right coaching staff for that, though. A lot of coaches don't like that. They want to have all the control on everything that's happening, and they have to trust you to do that. Obviously, in Miami, they trust him to do that. So he looks great doing those things. The question is, I think you're going to have the right coaching staff that likes that ability and thinks they can rein him in just a hair, but can use that ability. If not, he's a guy I can see dropping in the draft just because teams are like, I don't know what we'll do with him or how we succeed with him. So he's a guy I think could go up and down, and landing spot and coaching staff I think are going to be big because he's a guy with the right landing spot in a quarterback needy team. I think he could jump into top 2 or 3, but not looking at what team needs are and stuff in that and where he's landing just yet. I feel like he's a little more that mid-first round pick right now.
I just love watching Cam Ward play. It feels like his heart rate never goes above like 40. Like he's just like cool. Even when he's getting blitzed, like it might not always go well, but every now and again, you did mention Mahomes and some of the throws that he makes, just like, well, how did you even think about that? Never mind, like pull that off. It is really, really, if you've not watched any Cam Ward this year, definitely go out and check out some of his top plays. He's a hell of a lot of fun. Do you think he's a guy that needs to sit for a year?
Yeah, that's going to be the question, whether he can get, he's an older prospect. Now, I mean, if there's anyone that ever goes out there and says, well, this is why you should have the transfer rule the way they have it now, it's Cam Ward. This guy started at Incarnate Word, had a monster, transfers up, ends up, at a bunch of different places, ends up eventually at Washington State, has a really good year at Washington State, but was just not, people are looking at him like, man, you're just not ready. Because he could have came out last year, but I think he would have probably been like maybe a 3rd or 4th round pick. And then, everybody wanted him in the transfer poll. He went to Miami, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a great spot for him because they have nice talent at wideout, good running backs. And, man, he is absolutely taken full advantage. If you look at the Heisman prop bets, depending on what site you're looking at, currently he's number 2 in the Heisman vote. So going into this week, so it's Dylan Gabriel, he's number 2, Travis Hunter's number 3, and Ashton Jeanty's number 4. And until Jeanty had the down game, which I hate to say a down game for 133 yards on touchdown, but until he had that down game last week, Jeanty was number 1. So I think Cam Ward's going to be in the mix, especially if Miami, they've lucked out on some wins this year. But if they can somehow make the playoffs and get more eyes on him, I think that helps him come draft time. But I think there's going to be some teams that like him. I think there's going to be some teams that are absolutely out on him because I just think they're going to look at it and be like, oh, man, what do we do with this guy? But somebody's going to be like, oh, we can rein him in a bit, and then we can accentuate his strong suit. And it's going to be interesting to see where he goes because I like him a lot. Like I said, he was my QB3. He's up to my QB2 now.
Yeah, great player. Great pick at 106. If you're in that middle, he's the kind of guy that if he hits could propel you to the top of your leagues for sure. So let's move on from Cam Ward on to 107. Where are you going next, JT?
The next one for me, this is a really good running back group. And again, I think landing spot's going to make a big difference where some of these guys go. But if I'm just going straight talent, who's the guy I like Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State, the former Ole Miss running back, transfer to Ohio State. I know everybody in C2C leagues and CFF leagues hated the move because now all of a sudden you got him and Travion Henderson at the same spot, sharing carries. But I don't think, NFL, they're not looking at that. People want to be like, oh, well, your stats are going to go down. NFL doesn't care about that. They care about, the intangibles, their speed, your ability to take break tackles, your ability to catch the ball. They're not like, oh, well, he had 1,000 yards instead of 1,400 yards. They don't care. Yeah. They just absolutely do not care. So I think Quinshon Judkins, I think the offense at Ole Miss, man, I'm trying to think how I'm going to say this. It's a little more run and gun there with Lane Kiffin. So I think people don't necessarily trust it on the NFL side as much because they think, oh, it's like a really good college offense. It's easy for guys to put up big stats, but it's not necessarily translates the NFL well. I think the move to Ohio State, who runs a very, pro type of offense, I think it made sense for him. And I think it showed, even though Ole Miss is in the SEC, like you're just like, you don't want to say like, oh, SEC, Big Ten, obviously the two premier conferences in college football. I think Judkins is going to be right up there. I really like him. Former 3-star guy that has really kind of taken off and proven himself. To me, he was a lot of people's 1 or 2 coming into the draft. Jeanty's kind of taken a stranglehold on that, I think. But I still think Judkins is right there. If you end up getting Judkins in the middle to late of the first round, I think you're going to be super stoked about it.
Yeah, he's just a guy that come in and sort of before the season kicked off, a couple of questions were who's going to be that lead back, who's going to be the more impressive back. And I'm with you, JT. I've been more impressed with Judkins compared to Travion Henderson, just with the overall production. But I mean, this is a good thing as well, is it not? Like for your NFL squad, they're going, oh, this guy's been sharing a workload with Travion Henderson. That means there's much more tread still left on those tires, and he might be able to like squeeze out a little bit of extra production in the NFL because he's had this extra time in college to sit on the sidelines, right?
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a great transition to our 108. Yeah, that's a great transition to our 108. I've got Henderson right behind him. I got Travion Henderson. Obviously, he was that freshman year. He had at Ohio State, had every Devy guy drooling. There's a ton of people that thought if he would have came out last year, he was the number 1 running back off the board last year.
Yeah.
I think he could have been. He stayed. Maybe hurt him just a little bit just because I think this is a much deeper running back class than last year. So I think he might fall a little bit because of that. I still think the talent's there. So even if he goes a little bit later, that's not going to scare me away at all. The biggest thing on him is injuries. He's been banged up a lot of his college career. So if he can stay healthy, you feel great about him. That's the one thing you're worried about with the running backs is you don't want guys that are banged up all the time. Henderson can catch the ball. He can run the ball. He's got that breakaway speed. I like him a ton. Again, I think these running back positions are going to be fairly fluid depending on where they land and where they get drafted. Because I think a lot of these guys, maybe Jeanty sneaks into the first round. I think a lot of these guys are like second to third round picks. But I think that's not a killer in value like it used to be in the past. Like you wanted guys that went the first round. We just know running backs don't. A second and a third round pick, I think is totally fine. I mean, even last year, there were guys going in the fourth round. I'm like, love the landing spot. I'm still taking him in the second round of my fantasy draft, even though he's a fourth round pick, which in the past, you're like, oh, if they're not first, second, third round, it's like 100% you're throwing a dart with your eyes closed, like flyer. I don't necessarily think that's the case with running backs anymore. So even if some of these guys fall later in the draft than we think, and they go maybe late third round, I'm not sure. As long as the landing spot's decent, it's not going to scare me off of them.
Yeah, I'm right there with you at this stage. It's now just quite normal to see the running backs going in round 2 or round 3. So that's kind of where they're expected to go anyway. And what would you say? How do I phrase this in the best way? How big of a gap do you have then between Ashton Jeanty and Travion Henderson? Is it just as simple as if Henderson has a slightly better landing spot, he flips over Jeanty, or what? Not Jeanty, sorry, Judkins. Is that as simple as that?
I think it's pretty close. So if somehow Henderson went before him or slightly after Judkins, but ends up in a better landing spot, like on a team where you're like, oh, that's good, a good old line. Their running back is either they don't have a starting running back or their running back's old, and you're like, oh, he could be like the guy in a year or two. I think that would I could definitely, for me personally, I could flop those guys. I could take Henderson over Judkins. I think Jeanty right now is pretty decently ahead of all the other running backs. But again, we'll see what the NFL thinks. I think he's there. I just think he's a workhorse. But landing spots, they can matter a lot. I never thought Jonathan Taylor was going to go as late as he went in the draft. And I was like, and people were like, oh no, he went like late. So perfect example. So like Clyde Edwards-Helaire goes first round at LSU. Everybody loves the Chiefs. They're like, oh, I got to take him. I was a staunch JT guy. I was like, I don't care that he went first round. I don't care that he went to a great offense in the Chiefs. I was like, JT is a pure better player and athlete. And I was like, any draft I had, I took JT over CH. It wasn't even let me think about this for a second. I was like, JT 101 for me. If I had the 101, I took him 101 in every draft, even in drafts where like super flex where there's QB. I even took him over that in a few circumstances, unless I was absolutely desperate for QB. So this is one of those where is somehow Jeanty fell, but he ended up in a really nice spot, and he didn't go till like mid to late second round, but ends up in a great spot anyway. That doesn't kill it for me. Somebody else out there took Henderson at the end of the first round and then took Jeanty middle of the second round. Depending on landing spot, I would probably still take Jeanty as my RB1.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. And moving on to 109, you're sticking with running back here, and this is the big one for me of the episode, JT, because you're going Nicholas Singleton. I've heard so much hype about him. I don't see it. You got to sell me on Nicholas Singleton here. Yeah,
Singleton's a tough one in that the production was really nice to kick off as a freshman. So again, the Devy guys, you're putting them in in your mix, and you're going, okay, like how does he rank compared to all these other players? He was way up there. Now, and I'm going to talk about another Penn State guy here in a little bit. But the question becomes do you like the talent, or are you upset because Penn State has not been a good offense? They've been pretty poor the whole time he's been there. And is it a Singleton issue, or is it because Penn State really can't put together an offense and you still really like the talent? I think he has the talent. I think there's going to be people down on him. I can easily see him, if he doesn't get super high draft capital, dropping to the mid-second round in your drafts. I completely can see that happening. So don't I'm not totally locked into here. I think he's got the talent. I think the NFL will like him more than fantasy people because of the stats. Like fantasy people will see the stats and be like, ugh, I would rather have one of these other guys that ran for 1,800 yards as opposed to him who like barely broke 1,000.
Yeah.
But I've seen quality out of him. I think he can be up there. Again, this is where I'm going to start getting to a spot in the first round where like I could be moving these guys pretty easily depending on where the draft capital is and where the landing spot is. He's in this, I think I've got, I think Judkins is my one. JT's my one. Judkins, Henderson's my tier 2. My tier 3 running back is Singleton and a handful of other guys that we can talk about here in a few minutes. I think they're kind of all lumped together. I think Singleton is a decent amount behind Judkins and Henderson for me, though. Even though I've got him drafted right next to him here, I think those guys I have pretty far ahead. I'd have to see like a premium landing spot and great draft capital for Singleton, I think, for him to jump those other two guys for me.
Yeah, he is, you're right, the kind of guy where you see a play out of him and you go like, oh, hello, and then that might be it for that game. And it's just like, you just wish you could see a bit, especially, I wish he would throw him the ball a bit more, actually. I've seen a couple of times where he's caught the ball. I was like, oh, that's quite nice, actually. I wish he could get a bit more involved in that. And the issue is, we say that about so many players in the NFL as well. You're like, throw that, like Josh Jacobs or something, for example. It's like, for years, people screaming, throw him the damn ball, and then eventually gets an opportunity to do that. So it's so hard to predict. But yeah, Nicholas Singleton, he's got the talent there. And yet, you're right, JT. I'm gonna keep more an eye out for those little short burst plays rather than focusing too much on the Penn State offense as a whole. So I'll make sure to do that going forward. So Singleton's in it at 1-9. We got 3 picks left of the first round. Who's after him at 1-10?
I've got Isaiah Bond from Texas. Had a few injuries this year. He's looked great when he's been in the game, but he's been banged up a little bit, missed a few games. To me, he's a first round NFL talent. And if he goes, I think he's probably going to go possibly late first round. He feels like guys should be in like the early to mid 20s for me in this draft. There's a lot of teams that need wide receivers still. It's like, I feel like everybody's drafting wideouts every year, and you still look at some teams and you're like, that's your starting group? Like, really? Those are your guys? Like, so there's going to be teams that need wideout. He's got a good sized body, and he's just got a lot of talent. Obviously, the injuries is a problem for him, but he's a guy, we saw some guys go late first round, early to mid second round last year. And I think he's probably a little more talented than some of those guys. So I think teams will go over them. For right now, for me, I think he's my clear-cut wide receiver 3 in this draft. Now, we'll see when we get the combine, see a couple other things, see what happens. But right now, I like him as my wide receiver 3. I think it's Tet and Burden in the top tier by themselves as top tier 1. I think Bond is in the second tier of wide receiver, but I like him a lot.
I would be shocked if after the combine his stock does anything but go up. That guy is lightning fast. So I've even heard Xavier Worthy's 40 time might be under threat immediately from Isaiah Bond. Do you think he's that quick?
I don't know if he beats that, but he's got a much better body type than Xavier Worthy. And then you look at where A.D. Mitchell went last year to the Colts. I think Bond is a lot better wide receiver than A.D. Mitchell. Personally, I mean, I think he's a lot better. So I think I would just really be shocked to see him trickle out of the late first round, early second round. I mean, if you got Quentin Johnston, who I was not a fan of coming into the draft at all, he was a guy I just was like, I would not take him. I was really hoping the Chargers were going to take Jordan Addison or JSN in that spot, and they took him. That killed it for me. But I could see them rectifying that. And, if they didn't get somebody else, I could see them going like Isaiah Bond in this draft too. So I like him a lot. I would be shocked. I mean, real shocked if he doesn't go in the first round of the NFL draft.
Yeah, he looks like a lock at first round for me as well. Maybe later in the first round, but someone's going to take a punt on a guy like Isaiah Bond for sure. And great to get him at the back end of your dynasty draft here if he does end up going around 110. And 2 picks to go, JT. Who's going at pick 111?
So this is a guy that had a lot of hype and kind of died off a little bit. It's one of those things. I think he's a really good player. It's just he's had so many other dynamic guys around him that he just maybe doesn't get, he's just doesn't get that shine that some of these other guys get. And that's a Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. People he was a guy that people had first round pick, top 5 dynasty asset a couple years ago. Then he ends up getting hurt for an entire year, kind of similar to the JSN thing, where he ends up missing a whole season. Yeah. Unlike JSN, he actually came back as opposed to leaving. I think he's not getting quite as much buzz because Jeremiah Smith, the freshman, has been just so dynamic. I also
think
that
guy is.
Yeah, he's crazy. He's crazy good. Obviously, if you're in a Devy league, you'd be all over him immediately. But I just think I just don't love Will Howard as a quarterback for Ohio State. I think he's very okay. I kind of actually think they screwed up by not keeping Kyle McCord. I think he should have got another shot. He's been great with Syracuse.
He's outside tearing it up at Syracuse
game at Pittsburgh, which was just wild. If anybody saw that game, so many deflections. I've never seen 3 pick sixes in the first half of a game in my life. It was wild. No. But outside of that, he has been very, very good there. I just think you're going to see NFL teams are going to look at Egbuka and they're going to be like, oh, this guy, he's maybe not our star number 1, but man, he could be a guy that catches 75, 80 balls, 1,000 yards, 5 or 6 TDs. He could be an absolute outstanding wide receiver too on a team that has like an alpha.
Yeah.
I like him a lot. He to me is just screams fantasy production in the right spot. I mean, you look at him, you get him on a team, with a solid quarterback with 1 or 2 other pieces where he doesn't have to be the guy. And I think he's going to perform really well for your fantasy team. I think he's good end of that first round, beginning of second round of the NFL draft, depending on who needs wide receiver. But he's a guy I would have no problem taking the first round of my fantasy draft if he went like early to mid second round in the NFL. I think I like Josh Downs a ton for the Colts. I couldn't believe he dropped to the 3rd round, in all honesty, when he did. I think he's a bigger, better version of Josh Downs. So I think he's a guy that could really slot in and perform pretty early for your team. Even if he doesn't go first round and he drops early to mid second round, decent landing spot, I still like him.
I think he's suffering a little bit from prospect fatigue because he has been around for so long, right?
Mm-hmm. And everybody likes the new guy on the block. Yeah.
I think he's suffering a little bit from that.
I think you might see it. If you're in leagues where guys aren't big, you're not in a Devy league. You're not in a league where guys play C2C or anything like that. And you're in a league where most of the guys in your league don't really pay attention to rookies until like it's rookie draft season. I think you'll end up seeing him go higher. I think the issue is for people that have been waiting on him in Devy forever or had to sit through the injuries in C2C or CFF leagues. I think those are the people that are going to be lower on him. When he gets the NFL, people like him, and guys that have no idea about him and just finally learn about him are going to be like, oh, this guy's really good, and he played with like some awesome college wide receivers. So I think that's gonna make a difference there.
Yeah, I think he's a great player to get snapped up at the back end of your first round for sure. As is this next player we're going to talk about, who's the final pick of the first round.
Yeah, so this pick for me is going to depend a little bit on your tight end premium, whether you have any tight end premium, whether it's a higher tight end premium. Are you 1.5 PPR? Are you 1.75? Are you 2? This will make a difference. If you don't have any premium, I could still see him going here, but I could see him dropping to the second round if you're in a league with no premium, depending on where some of these running backs and wide receivers go. But I've got Colston Loveland from Michigan. Yep. Obviously, the production's down a little bit as the offense is just struggling up in Ann Arbor. They just cannot move the football. Yeah. But I think, to me, that doesn't change the talent for me with him. He was really good on that national championship team. I mean, he was one of their top 2 producers on offense. JJ McCarthy went to him all the time when they really needed big plays. I think Loveland, it's gotten closer to me, and I could bring up this guy next, and we'll talk. I won't bring him up just yet. It's gotten close to me on whether he's the tight end 1 or 2. Coming into the year, I thought it was clear cut. He was tight end 1, and I liked him a ton, and I didn't think anybody was close to him. Another guy in the Big Ten has made up some ground on him, but I still like Loveland. I just like his frame. I like his ability to catch the ball. He just fits with this type of NFL, the way they use their tight ends. I think, he's just a really nice receiving threat tight end. He's a guy that he kind of reminds me of Dallas Goedert for the Eagles a little bit. And so I like him in there. So I think a team will take him in the first round in the NFL draft. So I think that will get fantasy managers going, oh, he's a first round pick. I like him. So he's a guy I would definitely be considering late first, early second, depending on my premium and where I'm sitting at tight end in my lineups.
Absolutely. And we can't just leave that hanging there. You said there's another guy that's sitting right there that could rival Loveland as the tight end one. Who is it? Let's kick that off with our second round.
I'll just jump right in there. So my sleeper second round guys. So Ty Warren from Penn State. I tell you what, everybody else who struggled at Penn State to kind of find any kind of offensive rhythm, he's been the one guy that's been like the shining bright star for Penn State this year, man. He had a monster game early this year that really kind of, I think, put him on the map for people. He was a guy I had already liked. We know Penn State, they produce NFL tight ends. They just do. They put out a ton of good guys over the years. I think Ty Warren's the next in that line. I could see some teams liking him over Loveland. And if he ends up going above him in the draft, I could see him sneaking ahead of him in fantasy draft. So I don't think it's a clear cut right now. Like it's going to be Loveland. Then it's going to, Bowers last year was like, it was Bowers and no one. Like that wasn't even close. No one was even questioned. The question was like, who's your 2, 3, 4? Last year. This year, I think you're going to have some question there with whether it's Loveland or Ty Warren. And I'll give you my third tight end, just since we're talking about tight ends right now. And that's Rondé Gadsden from Syracuse. Had an injury all year last year. Has been really good this year. Got banged up the other day again. So that's going to be a little bit of an issue, is can he stay healthy? He's basically a big slot receiver. He's not your typical inline tight end that's going to block, but if he ends up on the right team that's going to use him in the slot, they're going to use him like a Kyle Pitts where he's not really ever inline blocking. Gadsden's a guy that I could see going mid to late second round in the NFL draft, possibly early third. He could drop just because of the injury woes. He's going to have to end up on a team that needs to use him as a big slot because he's just not your prototypical tight end. He's not a great blocker at all. But we've seen that teams are willing to do that in today's NFL. They're willing to do the mismatch, and he's awesome on mismatches. Great size. His dad played in the NFL, his former NFL player for the Dolphins. He's a guy I really, really like. If you play Devy or C2C, CFF, he's a guy that's been on your radar for a while because he had a blow-up season 2 years ago. And he's really the injuries have kind of slowed the burn for him a little bit of people really want him, but he to me is going to end up being in that top 3 with those other guys. I think he's slightly behind those guys because I don't think he goes in the first round, where I think the other 2 guys can go in the first round, but those would be the 3 tight ends in the first 2 rounds of fantasy drafts that I would have my eyes on, especially in tight end premium leagues.
Yeah, absolutely love that. That's nothing better than like getting a sneaky good tight end, like the third or back end of the second round that you can just plug in and
love it.
Not have
love it when you can get those guys late.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So before we let you go, JT, obviously we a few more, not just the actual tight ends. You got a couple of other second round prospects or sleeper prospects. Why don't you give us 2 or 3 of those, and then I'll have a little look at my rankings and my list, and if there's no one we chat about yet, I might throw out one extra name to you.
Okay, so the next one for me, I'll just go into running backs. So the next running backs out there for me, they're going to in that third group kind of tier. I've got a couple guys. It's Trevor Etienne from Georgia, the running back. Obviously, his brother plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Devin Neal, running back for Kansas. Kansas had a disappointing season, but I do like Neal a lot. And Omarion Hampton, running back from North Carolina. He's sneaky good. He's a guy that, depending on where he gets drafted, he could end up moving up to that RB2 or 3 for me. I think he's really good if he can be on the right team because he's got the body, size, speed. Little underrated just because North Carolina's not good this year at all. But man, he was a beast last year. I still think he's got a ton of talent. He's a guy that could sneak into that first round very easily for me. He's probably the guy, if I had to slide anybody out, I would take Singleton out and move Hampton in for him. But that's my next group of running backs is the guys I'd be looking at that early to mid second round would be those three guys I want to have my eye on. Also, Ollie Gordon for Oklahoma State. He's going to be one that's iffy. Yeah. I know some people that have watched the film and just have ripped him and like, dude, I don't see it. He's had big stats, but I don't see it at the NFL level. So it's going to be, he's a guy I'm going to be very interested in seeing how the NFL views him, because he had some out last year was phenomenal at Oklahoma State, but I'm a little worried about him at the NFL level of whether they think he's going to be a guy that's an every down back in the NFL.
Yeah, he kind of did nothing for a lot. It was 2 weeks ago. He had a monster game as well, where he was just hurdling over anything that moved, which was really, really cool to see. But yeah, he's the kind of guy you're like, is it a mental thing with him? Maybe because it looks like he can do everything. He's done it before. It's like what's going on there? So he could be someone that could drop in and is maybe worth the risk. I don't know if this guy is eligible next year, but he's getting absolutely no buzz, and I've loved him at the running back position this year. Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, I think, is just playing lights out, right?
Yeah, he's been really nice. I have him on one of my college teams. He has been phenomenal. A guy that didn't have a lot of buzz coming the year, but he's a guy that I think NFL scouts will love. I think they'll love what he's done. I definitely think if he decides he's going to come out, he's a guy could be right in that mix here. Kind of like Jalen Wright, who came out from Tennessee last year and was pretty consistently early second, mid second round of fantasy drafts. I think you could absolutely see him right in that mix. I'm telling you what, if you get a chance to go out there and acquire some early to mid second round picks or rookie picks for next year, I'm all about doing that right now. Especially if you have some teams where you got some pieces. Like I have Jameis Winston in a couple leagues. I shipped him off for second rounders next year because I didn't really need him. And my team wasn't great. I was like, it's not going to help me this year anyway. I shipped him off for a second rounder because I want a shot at a bunch of these running backs in this second round. There's a lot of guys I like in this mix, and I want as many shots at these guys as I can get.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. So running back cover there. Let's flip over. You talk about tight end as well. We can't leave the wide receivers on the quarterback side. So let's go through who's your next group of wide receivers that you like, or is there a couple of names that stand out?
Yeah, there's a couple of guys I like here. So Trey Harris out of Ole Miss missed last week's game, but he's kind of been the show for Ole Miss and Jackson Dart this year. I like Trey Harris. He's got the good body size. Former Louisiana Tech guy that transferred to Ole Miss. You were hoping that was going to be able to transfer over. You're going to see. And he's done it. He's been one of those guys that's like, he jumped up a class and absolutely can perform and play. He has been an absolute monster this year when he's been healthy. He's a guy I think that could easily be maybe depending on the combine and what he does, he could sneak in the late first round. I think he's a definite second round wideout. I'd be shocked if he didn't go mid to early second round. So I love Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. Just good speed, great body size. All that. He's one of my favorite guys. A guy that I like, and he's been on people's radars for a while. I got two guys from Oregon. You got Tez Johnson, smaller guy, but has proven he can play. And obviously, with the success of guys like Jordan Addison, Josh Downs, we've seen that you don't have to be a huge guy in the NFL to make it. I think Tez Johnson's a guy that's going to get some buzz. Also, his teammate, Evan Stewart, hasn't had the monster year at Oregon. People were hoping. It's going to be interesting to see whether he decides to come out, what kind of buzz he's getting from NFL guys, whether he decides to come out or go back to Oregon for a year. He was at Texas A&M. They really struggled on offense. He needed to get somewhere that threw the ball more. Got to Oregon. He's had some really big games this year, but he's also had some games where he's just kind of disappeared. So he's a guy that's interesting. I want to keep an eye on him if he comes out or whether he goes back. And then I had one other guy. Who else was I going to bring up to you that's draft eligible? Because there's a few guys I like out there that aren't necessarily draft eligible this year, so they'll got to slide down a bit.
Yeah. Well, why don't I tell you the next guy on my list yet?
I was going to say Matthew Golden from Texas is a guy who's been a little bit injured up and down. He's a guy I'm going to keep an eye on, and Jeremy Bernard from Alabama has had a nice season. So he's a guy that I think could get up there in some circles. He's another guy I want to keep an eye on and kind of see what the NFL guys think about them. Those would probably be the other guys that I'm kind of having that tier 3, tier 4 of wide receiver group.
Yeah, I love all those prospects. The guy I had just at the top of my list that hasn't been mentioned yet, someone I think can come in and be a solid pro right off the bat, Xavier Restrepo from Miami. I really like what he's been doing this year.
Yeah, Restrepo's super underrated. He's kind of been unlocked this year with Cam Warren. He was a guy that anybody who's been in Devy circles has kind of had an eye out for him. You know, it was like, oh, that guy could be really good. I think he's a guy that I don't think a lot of people know about right now, but I think the NFL guys are going to like him. And so I think I could see him shooting up draft boards for sure. Depending on his landing spot, man, you've got him early, mid, somewhere in the second round. You'd be pretty happy about it, I think, because he's got a nice pro game. He's got a game where I think he can find space. He can be a really nice slot receiver. He can do a little bit of everything. So I think that's a great pull by you. I do like him a lot.
Yeah, I think he's pro ready already. Like, he's got a lot of experience. It just seems like a guy who's not going to need a ton of work. He can just come in and be a good value with a second round pick for sure. And we can't leave out the quarterbacks. It's a super flex league. You've mentioned the big hitters at the top. Who are some of these other quarterbacks that you think might sneak in? You can say Brady Cook if you want. I know you're a Mizzou fan. You can talk about Brady if you need.
So this is going to be interesting because it's really going to see where some of these guys draft. So I'll have to be honest. I was not a big Penix or Bo Nix guy last year. I did not think either one of them were going top 15. I thought maybe they would slide in late first round, but I thought they were second round picks. So with that being said, we know there's some desperate teams out there for QB. So I think some of these guys are going to end up going higher in the draft than I really think they should right now. I think that then will also change your fantasy formats. Will some of these guys possibly sneak into the late first round, early second round, kind of like you saw with Bo Nix and Levis and Penix the last couple of years where people were taking them into the first round, beginning of the second round of fantasy leagues? Yes, I think that's going to happen. The guys right there for me now, it's Carson Beck, who I think a lot of people had as their QB1 coming in the draft. They just haven't seen a ton out of them at Georgia this year. I think the issue is, even though Georgia has a load of talent offensively at wide receiver, I think they're down. I think that's affected him. Bowers was really good. McConkey was really good. You know, they've had some really good guys out there. I still think Beck is a guy that NFL teams are going to like. Somebody's going to fall in love with him. Be interesting to see where he goes. Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss is a guy that is all over the board. It's like one week you see people talk about him and you think, oh man, maybe he's got a shot. And then you see other weeks you're like, people think he's a system quarterback. They're like, at best, he's a third or fourth round pick in the NFL draft. So he's a guy I want to see the evaluations for NFL guys, because it could be crazy, but he does feel like should be a mid-round NFL pick, which means you're not going to be taking him early in your fantasy drafts.
He really reminds me of watching, and I don't know why. I thought of it one day, and I cannot shake it now. He just really reminds me of Jalen Hurts whenever I watch Jackson Dart play.
So and this is what I think, if you can find a team that likes him and thinks that they can do, because again, if you remember, you go back and look at Hurts, he wasn't a guy that everyone was on. He was a second round pick, and when he was a second round pick, it was a surprise. Like, people were like, "Ooh, Eagles are taking him in the second round." And and then fantasy leagues, people were like, didn't know what to do with him. They're like, he's behind Carson Wentz. Like, do you take him? Like, he was a second round pick, but like, how soon is he going to play? And so he was dropping to late second round in a lot of drafts because people just weren't sure what to do with him. If you get a team that ends up really liking Dart and thinking like he fits our system, like, you get a team like the Eagles who really likes him and takes him, to me, that's going to adjust things for me. Then I'm going to be like, okay, this team believes in what he can do, because I think the guy has talent. I mean, he was a highly recruited guy out of high school, went to USC before he transferred to Ole Miss. So the guy definitely has arm talent. The question is, are you going to have an NFL team that likes him, as opposed to some teams that are going to think he's more of a system QB? So he's definitely a guy in the mix for me. Another guy that's super debated, and has been for years, is Quinn Ewers from Texas.
Yeah.
Some people love him. Some people hate him. I have to be honest. I've not been a big Quinn Ewers guy. I've got some Devi of him. I've got some C2C just in case, but he's just not been a guy that I've been completely sold on. Now, can I see an NFL team being completely sold on him? Absolutely. Absolutely. I can see an NFL team being sold on him and being like, we're taking him top 15. But I also can see, him not doing well in the combine, having some issues, and then teams being like, we're just not sure about him. So he's another one I really need to see the evaluation from the NFL teams and see what they think on him, because he's a guy I literally could see going top 10 and then not even first round. It's just, somebody just has to fall in love with you. So he's a guy there. Now, the last guy I'll bring up as far as quarterbacks are concerned, and another guy that, again, is kind of controversial, and that's Drew Allar from Penn State. I told you I was going to bring him up. He has, to me, all the tools that NFL coaches want. He's big, got a huge arm, isn't super fast, but is mobile, can move. Has got the pedigree, but has played at a good college at a high level of talent, like in the Big Ten, but hasn't necessarily put it all together. So, I mean, if you get on Twitter or X and you look at Drew Allar, I mean, you'll see people that are like, absolutely love him. He's a first round talent, blah, blah. Then you'll see people like, this guy is complete trash. He shouldn't even be starting for Penn State. And there's no way he ever plays in the NFL. He's not even draftable. So it's like that far of a difference on him. I'm on the boat that I think NFL teams are going to love him. I think they're going to love the size. I think they're going to look and go, Josh Allen project. They're going to go, hey, not greatest numbers, huge arm, can throw the deep ball, got to work on the accuracy a little bit. But you know as well as I know, NFL coaches, they really think highly of themselves. There's going to be somebody that's like, I can fix Drew Allar. I can make Drew Allar a Pro Bowler, So there's going to be a coach out there that says, I can do it, depending on who that coach is, because there is some coaches I think can do that. But depending on who that is, I could see Allar being a top 10 guy. And I could see the shock and amazement from people when he goes top 10. And then people being like, well, what did he do at Penn State? Look at his stats. Oh, my God, he could never beat Ohio State. He could never beat Michigan. He couldn't win the big one. I can't believe they're wasting a pick on this guy. But I could see a team doing it. I could see the Giants doing it. They're a team that absolutely Dable would go, oh, I can make this guy work. So he's a guy that I think you're going to see a lot of hate on from people in the Twitter spaces and other areas because they just don't like what he's done in college. But he's a guy that has all the skill level. And I can see a team going, oh, and I think I can do more with him than I can with Cam Ward, and taking him over Cam Ward. So that's right. These quarterbacks to me are really going to be dependent on what the NFL thinks of them, where they take them. Because if you listen to people right now, they're like, none of these quarterbacks are good. This quarterback draft class sucks. None of them should be first round picks. And we just know that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Teams are going to take a chance on them. You're going to see at least 2, 3, maybe 4 of these guys go in the first round. It's going to happen. So that is going to be dependent on where these guys jump up. And do you get a Drew Allar going to, so say Drew Allar goes top 10 to the Giants. You're telling me people aren't going to think about taking him in the first round of their fantasy drafts? Of course they are, because they're going to be like, oh, well, Jones sucks. So of course he's going to go in. They took a top 10 quarterback. He's going to go in and replace him. You got to take the chance on the talent in a super flex league. If a guy's going top 10 in NFL draft, you have to. I mean, Penix was a guy that if it wasn't for Kirk Cousins being there and the contract he had, he would have been, for sure, people would have been taking him in the first round of fantasy drafts. He slipped in most drafts, depending on which ones you were in, or he was going early to mid-second in most of mine.
Yeah.
Now, if there was a desperate team was like, oh, I need a QB and I'm 3 years out from being any good because my team is garbage, I'm in total rebuild, I saw teams grabbing him because they're like, I don't need to play him
Why
for the
not?
next 2 years anyway. I'm going to wait on him. So you're going to get some teams that would do that. They'll go, okay, say Allard doesn't start first year and they give Daniel Jones 1 more year because of the contract before they cut him or something. If you're in rebuild mode, why wouldn't you take him? Why wouldn't you grab a guy like that?
The perfect target, like Michael Panic saying, the perfect like rebuild target to go after. So yeah, you need to look out for these guys who might potentially sit for a year, but if your team's sitting for a year anyway, you may as well go ahead and take them. And JT, Sally, that brings us to the end of the show. Just wanted to say thank you so much for hopping on and chatting some of these college players, and thank you of course to everyone who joined as well. If you've made it this far and you've not already hit a like and a subscribe, make sure that you've done that. That'd be greatly appreciated. JT, before you head off, can you just remind everyone where can they find all of your amazing work online?
Yeah, so all of the podcasts, you can find me at Fantasy in Frames. So go check those guys out, like and subscribe there. We've got tons of content, tons of shows, redraft, college football, dynasty, IDP, gambling shows, college football, NFL, DFS. We got everything. So go over there and check that out. We do stuff all week. I host the Stew with JT Brew. I do a college gambling and NFL show during the season. I also am on the Dynasty Evaluation where me and my buddy John McGlynn chop it up about what's going on in NFL fantasy that week. And then I do an IDP show called Shoot the Gap. We do that usually Wednesday nights, late night show on Fantasy and Friends where we talk about everything IDP. If you play IDP, you can check out my rankings on DLF, Dynasty Football. Go check them out. I do a top 150 IDP rankings, and I also do an article every week on Fantasy and Frames, my fades and plays of IDP players. So I give you 3 linemen or plays and fades, 3 linebackers, and 3 DBs, plays and fades every week. So that article typically comes out on Thursday or Friday. So you can check that out. And then on Fantrax, I do a little writing. I'm doing a Dynasty Risers and Fallers during the season, kind of a couple players highlighted who's moving up, who's moving down. That article typically comes out on Thursdays every week. So you can check that out at fantraxhq.com. And then if you're on DLF, after the season's over, I write a ton of draft content. I've actually got 2 articles coming up in the next few weeks on this topic that we just talked about, going over my favorite guys. So I gave you a little preview. Don't tell the guys over DLF. I gave you a little preview of what my article is going to look like here. I've got one coming up for this next season, and then I got one for the 2026 draft. Also, that'll be coming out sometime here in November as well, kind of give you an idea of some of those guys where I think they might go.
Absolutely. An absolute encyclopedia of fantasy football knowledge coming at you via JT himself. So, JT, once more, thank you so much for coming to join me on the Dynasty Hot Seat. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Remember, for anything Dynasty you need to know, keep it locked on the Certified Inferno. I will see you next time.